Hello, thanks for joining me, astrologer Patrick Arundell, for your year 2021 overview analysis. This special deep dive video will give you an exhaustive insight into what's coming for this year, the opportunities, and also some of the challenges. If you're new to my channel, please click or tap on the bell notification symbol and I'd be honoured for you to become a subscriber. Also, as we make our way into this new year, please consider your year 2021 personal horoscope forecast and character analysis combination special, 30% off based on your time, date and place of birth, totally unique to you, will help you soar way above your zodiac sign and give you searing insights into the time ahead. If you're looking to order your report and it's further into year 2021, please don't worry, I will give you a full 12 months from the time of order. So as we go into each new year, we get what's called a solar return. This is rather what I do for my clients on their birthday. This solar return, of course, occurs at midnight on the 1st of January, and that's the wheel that you can see on the screen. Now, of course, the critical thing with any solar return is where the sun is, and you can see in this case the sun's at 10 degrees 46 in the sign of Capricorn. It would always be in the sign of Capricorn at this time of year. Capricorn energy is very much about traditionality. It's about structures. It's about where we need to be persistent. It is also about where we need to take responsibility. It's where we need to set goals. It may be where we're thinking about property or material pleasures. But perhaps the most important influence from this solar return, which will provide a backdrop of energy for the whole of the next year, is the fact that the sun is angling with Uranus, the planet of surprises, in a 120-degree trine. Well, give and take a degree or so. Now, this particular trine is really asking us throughout the whole year, all of us, in all of our approaches, to embrace the concept of innovation. But there are some sort of interesting features here. Uranus is actually in a sign that it's not that comfortable in. It's known as being in fall in the sign of Taurus. Also, the sun in Capricorn is not so much about the new way of doing things. It's very much about maintaining how things have always been done. So there's an inherent change being foisted upon us. And in some ways we may be resisting that, which would be entirely natural. But whether it's in terms of how we live at home, how we interact, around technology, around medicines, around new ways of approaching our mindset of this new reality that's developed through COVID, this is a very helpful influence indeed. So that's the standout influence at the turn of this year. Now, it's also important to say that if we take the midpoint between the moon, you can see it is in the 10th house. So the moon's going to show its feelings. We're going to show our feelings in a very open way in the next year. It's in Leo, which can be very warm. But if you look across the heavens, Saturn and also Jupiter, along with the Sun and Mercury, are all gathered in the 4th house of this natal chart. Now, this chart is constructed on Universal Central Time and based on Greenwich in London. Some other astrologers will get a different ascendant if they're doing their chart based on Sydney, Los Angeles, New York, and so on. But in this chart, we get the ascendant at 7 degrees Libra, and that puts the moon in the 10th house. And that's very much about how we interact with the world at large. So there may be part of us that could feel that we want to maintain a degree of dignity, a degree of success. We want to feel that we're not too exposed. But on the other side of the heavens, in direct opposition, is Saturn. Now, Saturn in Aquarius It's a co-ruler of Aquarius, and it's very much to do with Aquarius energy has a duality. Part of it is more modern and progressive, which comes through Uranus. Its modern ruler, traditional ruler of Saturn, is much more about maintaining the status quo and certainly appreciating the values of those institutions and organisations which are very much in it for us all. And although Aquarius energy can be very individualistic, it is very much about the group as well. So having Saturn blocking the moon at the turn of this year is giving us a big understanding that we're not going to be able to freely associate quite as easily as we might dream of after all the lockdown limitations and instructions that have been so prevalent for so many of us over the last 9 or 10 months. So I think we need to have reasonable expectations that we are going to need to make sure that we're looking after home and hearth. So that big gathering of energy, if you look on the wheel, so we have the Sun, Mercury, Saturn, Jupiter, but also Pallas, which is an asteroid, very much to do with our desire to get things done. They're all in the 4th house of this chart. So the reality of this year for most people is going to be focusing on security, which the 4th house is very much about. Now, in a physical sense, security is where we live. It's also how we live there. It's also who we live with. And it's also our sense of ease in that environment. But also in a more spiritual way, it's about how we feel within ourselves. So I think this new Aquarius energy that's coming from the conjunction between Saturn and Jupiter, which is so important. We've had this elemental mutation. So the element of air is so powerful this year. And I do feel that that's going to be very helpful to us all. But you can see that considerations about how we live at home, how we work at home even, with Saturn being there, are going to be very much to the fore. Now you can see that Uranus is in the 8th house of this chart. That's very much about where we're most deeply invested, and it can be where we're most intimate. But hold on, this is Uranus. So if there's an intimate relationship that isn't working very well, it is going to come to the fore this year, because pretty well from the start of the year through till about the 21st of July, Saturn and Uranus are going to be in a right angle. They're also going to go back into that right angle for just about the last 5 or 6 weeks of 2021 too. So you may have heard people talking about the new epoch that the conjunction between Saturn and Jupiter are bringing, and I do feel they are going to raise our consciousness about the need to act collaboratively. But of course, Saturn in Aquarius can also be a quite distant energy, quite a cold energy, quite detached. It's not necessarily going to be a panacea. And it's ironic that Uranus and Saturn are the co-rulers of Aquarius, and yet Uranus is in a part of this chart that for anyone who's got a fixed zodiac sign, which is Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius, this particular right angle is going to be quite impactful this year, because they're both in fixed signs, but Uranus is about change. And in its full, in the sign of Taurus, it can see us resisting change or being much more rebellious in a way that people might be quite surprised to experience. So what I think that this year is going to be is a staging post between how it has been through that eclipse series between the signs of Cancer and Capricorn, which are cardinal, which are very much to do with power. And of course, then we had the solar eclipse on the 14th of December in the sign of Sagittarius, which was very close to Mercury, and then forging a wonderful trine to Mars, even though Mars was still in shadow, going through its slowest motion for many, many years. And then, of course, as we come into this new year, Mars is still in shadow. It doesn't emerge from shadow until the 4th of January. And so, therefore, I think we can all expect that there can be quite a lot of tension this year. And that tension, I think, is going to be through people's desire to be very individualistic, which is very Aquarius, against what the expectations are of others. And part of those expectations are still going to come from Pluto. Pluto's been in Capricorn since 2008, and Pluto is broadly in a right angle with Mars as we make our way into this new year. So therefore their influence is going to be felt for the whole year. But guess what? If we take the midpoint between the moon in that rather constrained Leo position, when we take into account the opposition with Saturn, if we take the midpoint between that moon, which is of course very charismatic, and we take the position of the sun at 10:46 in Capricorn, we get a 21-degree sun-moon midpoint in Libra. Therefore, we get a T-square between the midpoint, Mars, and Pluto. So, although the ascendant for this chart is in Libra, although the midpoint is there, which is very much about finding balance, it's about working towards some kind of collaboration, it's about being aware of other people's needs. There's going to be groups of people in society who will be absolutely determined to do what they want. They will see conspiracies, they will see threats, they will see challenges to what the government message is. And it's good that people do have a voice, that they do express their opinions, if that's what they sincerely hold. The trick is going to be in expressing opinions that are totally factual. And sometimes facts are hard to find on the internet. We can sure find things that confirm our opinions, but finding facts can sometimes be a little bit elusive. So why might that mixed message, why may the fake news onslaught that's been so powerful over recent years, why might that still be a problem this year? And the simple fact is Neptune. If we go back to the solar return for year 2020, Neptune was conjunct the moon. The moon controls our emotions, it controls tides, it controls obviously cycles for anyone who has cycles, and also it's about how we have a sense of our peace and security wherever we live. So what Neptune did, which controls gases, it's very much to do with distortion, things are misty, steamy, it's very hard to pin down what the energy is. It created a lot of confusion. We also had 3 retrogrades last year of Mercury that all started off in water signs. Now 2 of them, firstly the Cancer one went back into Gemini, the Libra one went into Scorpio, then back into Libra. But that created a lot of issues. And also we had Mercury in the sign of Pisces in retrograde, and that was very damaging to clarity in terms of sharing international information, I feel. And I think that led to a big explosion of COVID right at the start, because there wasn't enough joined up thinking, there wasn't the resources in place, the planning was very poor, the execution was muddled, confused. Messages, as we all know in Britain, seem to get changed every 5 minutes, and that is because of that Neptune position last year. This year, Neptune's in a square with the North Node. What's the North Node? It's a moon position which reflects the overall direction of travel of society. So you can see that the North Node here is in the 9th house of knowledge. So truthful knowledge, higher knowledge. So we're being asked in Gemini to fact check, but because Neptune is in the 6th house, which 6th house is very much about details, but Neptune and details go together, well, they don't. So very non-counterintuitive. And then we've also got Venus in the 3rd house of everyday communication, which is about charm, it's about, you know, winning people around to our point of view. That's squaring with Neptune. It's in opposition with the North Node squaring with Neptune. So another T-square. So we have 2 very important T-squares that are influencing the whole of this year. But the issue with that Saturn and Uranus issue, it starts to really pick up pace once Mars moves into Taurus on fully on the 7th of January. By the 18th and 19th of January, Mars is coming alongside Uranus. There's going to be, sadly, an earthquake, volcano or tsunami that comes from that, I feel, because they're going to be squaring up with Saturn and Jupiter. Something of an international nature is going to get a bit explosive around that time. And for all of us, for all our lives, this tension between wanting to do what we want as individuals, that comes very much from Aquarius, even if the higher side of Aquarius is very much about the whole of person kind, and Mars being conjunct Uranus in Taurus is going to make us want to consume. We really want to have some good stuff. So that could see us being much more feckless when it comes to the impact on the environment if we get that treat that we've been denied largely over the last year. So something quite turbulent is really going to get going from that point. But in terms of those retrogrades, 3 this year, all in air signs. 30th Jan, 20th Feb, Aquarius, 29th May, 21st June, Gemini, 27th September through to 17th of October, Libra. Now, of course, there's a shadow period before and after in each of those, so it's not confined to those dates. But the great news compared to last year, where we had what I think I called it once, it's a splosh dosh. If you think about what we had last year, it was so creating of confusion. What we're going to have this year is much more clarity coming through. But there are some challenges. The solar eclipse, which occurs in the sign of Gemini on the 10th of June, is in actual fact going to be conjunct Mercury, the ruler of Gemini. That sounds brilliant, and it would be brilliant if flipping Neptune wasn't in a right angle. So that potential for confusion, distortion, fake news trolls on. And then later in the year, on the 4th of December, we do have another conjunction between the Sun and Mercury, and this one isn't affected by Neptune. So that's something to really relish. We do, however, have on that December solar eclipse a semi-sextile to Venus and Pluto, which are conjunct in the sign of Capricorn. So I think that actually weirdly might see a bit of a revival in the stock markets, that particular conjunction. But also we must remember for the first 5.5 months of this year, we're still surfing the magnificence of the solar eclipse which occurred on the 14th of December. And I do think it's much lighter, freer, more flexible because it's mutable. So it's mutable solar eclipse land this year. It's all air in terms of the Mercury retrograde, so it's really helps. We are not going to get instant answers to COVID. I do think it will continue to be a very powerful part of our lives. If you choose to have immunisation, you may feel that something might be much more back to normal by Easter. I think it's much more realistic to expect it's going to be towards the end of July. And I will tell you why. The planet that rules international affairs, Jupiter, is not spending the whole of this 12 months in the sign of Aquarius. From mid-May through to the end of July, it is in the sign of Pisces, which it governs. During that period of time, we may see some kind of improvement to anything to do with shipping or the transportation that goes on internationally. There may be some kind of improvement, but of course there is a 4-month retrograde that goes into that. And then by the 27th of July, it heads back into Aquarius. It does make a reappearance into Jupiter late in the year, the last 3 days, I think. If you are born early in the sign of Pisces, some kind of up can occur for you later this year. If you're in Aquarius, you may have some kind of breakthrough financially, which is going to be very nice from the middle of May onwards. But it's not all Aquarius and Jupiter energy all this year. And even on this solar return, Jupiter itself is in conflict with Uranus. Now, if you think about it, Uranus is very rebellious, but it also pushes us to change the things we don't really want to change. Jupiter is about higher ideals, travel. It is about enthusiasm. It's the traditional planet of fortune. And it's possible that in the right angle with Uranus, it may push us to change some things collectively, even if we're rather reluctant to do it. But of course, because Jupiter can be about the rule of law, there's going to be conflict between citizens and governments around the world this year. And I definitely think that's going to be a case in the first 6 months of this year. So I don't think we're out of the woods with COVID. I think this year is a transition year. I've obviously read that some astrologers think that this is an epoch that brings in a new dawn. I'd like to think absolutely that they're right. I hope for this too. I think more realistically it's going to be when Pluto moves into Aquarius initially in 23, fully in 24, that we're really going to see a big shift coming. But there is one thing I'd like to tell you about this chart, which I really, really like. And that there is, if we look at the moon position, 2 degrees in Leo, we look at the Chiron position, 5 degrees 3 in Aries, and we look at Juno, which is an asteroid, in Sagittarius, they're in a grand fire trine. So the one thing we can bring to this year is passion. And of course we have got Mars also in the sign of Aries, and it is forging a gorgeous angle to Venus. So if there's something or someone that really grabs your imagination, this could be quite a year. In fact, from the 3rd to the 6th of June could see some massive falling in love for some people, and particularly if you're a water sign, so just hold that one. But that's basically my summary for this year, that the potential that comes from the collective that is in Aquarius, including Pallas, but Pallas does square up to Uranus, so our desire to be good eggs comes into conflict with our desire to consume, which is very much more to do with Taurus energy. And Uranus is like, well, I'll do what I want anyway. So we're going to have lots of factions this year. We're not going to have people acting in an entirely cooperative way. As I did predict at the start of COVID, initially you'd get a lot of adherence, and then people will start to think, well, in relative terms, not many people are dying, and the economic impact is much worse. It's having an awful impact on people's mental health. I'm going to go out and do what I want. And unfortunately, it's not how many people that it kills COVID which makes it so notable. It's just how blinking infectious it is. And of course, now we know there's an even more infectious strain. But there is the potential to be more gregarious. There is the potential to believe that we can fire things up in some ways. But I think the fact that we've got all that gathering of energy in the 4th house suggests the reality of this year for us all is about understanding that with the North Node squaring up with Neptune, we as a group of citizens in the world don't quite know where this is all going at the moment. We're a bit confused, we're a bit baffled. It is, you know, draining and scary all at the same time, but there is a sense of something bigger building, and it can build through that Saturn and Jupiter energy, but it's going to take time for things to catch up, particularly about environmental awareness, because we've only got to look at the amount of plastic in the oceans to know that we need to use that Sun trine Uranus energy to invest more and more in technologies to clean, to rinse, to make this world a safer place to live, where we can have enjoyable holidays. We can do some things to do with consumption, but it's not always at the cost of the planet, and doing it at bargain bucket prices that makes some people very, very wealthy, but collectively we may get what we want, but we've got to see the bigger picture. And that's what Aquarius energy is about, the big picture. Now, I have done an overview video for each of the zodiac signs for year 2021. Please see that below. But I'm now going to give you a brief synopsis for each zodiac sign, starting with Aries. Well, Aries, with Mars in your own sign at the start of this year, your need to manifest your individuality is strong, but you may have come into conflict with someone who seems to hold the power. It may just be the way society is. It may be a line manager, it may be a partner, it may be an offspring. some kind of battle for ascendancy has really been a marking point for 2020. In 2021, I think you're going to start to move forward. You're going to let go of some friendships that are no longer working. You're going to be much more focused on the future, but that future is going to be about trying to find a way to bring money into your world that doesn't break your principles. So you're not doing something that gives you absolutely no sense of worth, or it gives you a sense that maybe you're doing something that it's just for the money. That kind of thing is going to really lose attraction for you, and that's going to see you thinking much more about how you can reposition your future in a more suitable way to fit the fast moving world that we live in. Now, Taurus, for you, this can be a year when you really make some big decisions about your work, where you live, property matters. Perhaps even there's going to be something featuring about your parents or your kids if you've got them. But if you feel very inhibited by the responsibilities you've got at the moment, you could find yourself wanting to break out and do something completely different. And with Uranus and the Sun in Capricorn in such a glorious alliance, this is perfectly primed for you to take a walk on the wild side. And even if you're someone who gains real comfort from familiarity and routines, which Taurus people often do, you're often the people who are the glue in family units or organisations because you're solid and reliable. But I think there's part of you that does want to be a lot more edgy this year. But if you're in a professional situation which is not giving you much satisfaction, I think you may be rethinking there for sure. Now, Gemini, for you, this is an interesting solar return, because the fact that you've got a solar eclipse in your sign, the fact you're surfing one from the solar eclipse which occurred in your 7th house at 14th of December last year, suggests that relationships or your individuality, how you interact with people, is going to be a big story this year. But I do feel a lot of Gemini people went through a degree of pain about where you're most invested. So if it's deep relationships, investment in business, something you felt very passionate about for a long time, it may be tested last year. And with Saturn and Jupiter in your 9th house of discovery, it's almost like if something isn't working for you, especially if you're feeling very restless. I feel that for Gemini people, ever since Uranus went into Taurus, mid-May 2018 to mid-October 18, back March 7th, 19, ever since then, particularly if you're early born Gemini, it almost might have felt like you've got a stone in your shoe, and you keep, or a piece of grit, and you keep stopping and pulling your shoe off and shaking it, putting your shoe back on, but it's still there. You can't quite figure out what it is that's making you feel a little bit on edge. And it could be that your psychology, your shadow side, the side of you that you may be less keen to embrace, actually needs to come into being a bigger part of you. And because you're a very mental sign, and this year gives you lots of opportunities to communicate in a superbly effective way, but I think the big trick is embracing that Uranus in the 12th house. Because if you don't, I do feel that something, an energy, something that's not quite sorted out or resolved from the past, a worry, an anxiety, perhaps past hurt and debris that may need looking at, bringing up and releasing. If you don't do that, I just think it can take on a kind of a louder dynamic than it needs to. So it's about getting in touch with your emotions, but at the same time staying very engaged with your intellect. But there's no dangers around that for sure. Now, Cancer, of course, you've had such a clustering of energy over the last couple of years in your sector of relating. Relationships have been a big part of what you've been sorting out. I don't necessarily just mean with people in your family or people next door, or with people that you work with, or even in a romantic context. It's more relationships with the world at large, how you interact. And because Mars is still very prominent at the top of your chart as this year begins, that gives you a lot of power potential. If you use your power potential wisely, you can be one heck of a leader over the next year. But I do feel, because Uranus is in a part of your horoscope that's to do with being very original and to do with the future, some kind of completely new way of approaching life might actually remarkably work out enormously well for you, particularly if it's some kind of collaboration, but you mustn't lose your identity through this collaboration. That's absolutely vital. So Leo, it's all about relationships this year for sure. Of course, with Saturn and Jupiter in your 7th solar house, it may not be necessarily how you perceive relationships. It may be how people perceive your relationships, or perceive how you relate, or not, in their humble opinion. So you're going to get some firm feedback this year with Saturn in opposition to your Sun, and of course to that moon position on this solar return. But also Uranus is going to be a real aggravant. There's no doubt about that at all. It's going to just remind you that there can be sudden electric energy sweeping into your relationship dimension. Someone could be much more frank than you're used to. You can generally run quite a lot on the conservative side. You like things to run along pretty samey because of your fixed nature, but you could encounter some much more outspoken individuals. It could be your kids, it could be co-workers, or perhaps it's you who's going to put that more cautionary side of your nature to one side and be much more upfront, even enjoying a little bit of the thrill that can come from being a bit more forceful about your point of view, especially if you have been providing a lot of support over the last few years, which is entirely possible with all that 6th house energy which has been ongoing in the sign of Capricorn. But of course Mars over the last 6 months has been evoking a much greater desire to break free, do your own thing. And if you haven't felt you've been able to, perhaps due to COVID, that may have created quite a lot of nervous tension or restlessness, and work too may have been very, very changeable, not much stability there at all for you. But the great news is that as you come into this new year, as long as you're open-minded about the type of work you could go for, then something can come about which absolutely thrills you. But it may require you to give up a little bit of the leading role and to collaborate more with what others expect from you. Now, generally, Leo people do work well with others, but usually when you're playing captain. But there may be a situation this year where you have to give that away a little bit more. But you know, once we get to the point when we can sacrifice that level of control, it's actually a sign of how far we're evolving, because we're actually more deeply secure within ourselves. So if you let go a little bit of the control, I think that's going to open up lots of fabulous opportunities for you. And if you are single, that glorious angle between Neptune and Mars could well bring someone very thrilling into your orbit this year. The only thing I would say is that if you're in an ongoing tie, I think it's much more likely there where there could be some sticking points, perhaps between or about what each of you does, what each of you contributes, and the need to change and flex to these worldly circumstances may not be something that's very easy. Also, with Neptune square into Venus, if you don't really feel you know where a partner is coming from at the moment, it could feel very discombobulated. But that brings you back to Saturn and Jupiter in your 7th house, and it could be you who's scrutinising their relationship approach. So that's really how it cuts up for you this year. Now, Virgo, obviously at the turn of the year, we have Capricorn, the Sun, in your 5th house of personal expression. And we have Uranus in your 9th house of adventure. What's not to like? If it wasn't for COVID, I'm sure that you would be doing something very thrilling, very different. And one of the things that I think would motivate you to make a change would be is if your role in life, but particularly around work or obligations, has become so boring and dull, and it's just not giving you a sense of self-satisfaction or gratification. I think Saturn and Jupiter are likely to see you wanting to make a change. It may be a change of complete career, doing something very fresh, very different. It may be that you can adapt your skills and repurpose them in a different way. But somehow or another, you need to feel alive. That's the stimulation that's coming from that role of the Sun and Uranus. However, with Venus in a square with Neptune, if you want something different in your home situation or where you live to what a partner lives, that could cause some hazy conditions. Getting to the bottom of what suits you both may prove to be a little bit more complex. Generally speaking, this big bank of energy, which on the solar return is in the 4th house, for you, it's very much around the 6th house stuff on the whole. So it's very much the details, the precision, going through the processes, being of service in some kind of way. But that could see you becoming much more virtuous around your diet, what you eat and drink, reading what's on packaging a lot more, making food from scratch, giving up something in a way which you feel has some kind of health factor or benefit to you. But I would do your research very, very carefully, because there's lots of fad diets around, lots of things that are supposed to be the panacea for all our weight or health or energy issues. But I would say it's very important with Saturn in your 6th house that you're really looking after yourself. Get into bed early, especially if you are thinking about making some fundamental changes around where you work or whom you work with. Now, Libra, obviously with having the ascendant on this chart in your sign and the midpoint, that's going to give you a lot of primacy, a lot of power. You're a cardinal sign. When you get angry, you can actually be at your best, because sometimes when you are too much of a people pleaser, you give away your power, you give away your sense of self. And I think Mars generally, of all the zodiac signs, even if it's been uncomfortable over the last 6 months, and there have been some scrapes, some bashes and bruises in terms of your interactions with others, I actually think it's been good for you in reminding you of the need to live your true purpose. And that isn't about just entirely giving up of yourself to others. So I think getting Saturn and Jupiter out of your 4th house is entirely good. They're in a much more creative zone. I think that can be generally very positive. And having Venus and Mars really in a gorgeous alliance as you go into this new year suggests that you need your mind to be switched on, as well as coming into contact with someone with the physical charisma that really switches you on. If you're in a relationship just for the security, or to have someone in your life, or because you feel it's what you should do, then that's not going to give you true fulfillment. So I think this chart is essentially saying to you, there's still more changes to come. You still need to assert yourself that much more assertively, but generally speaking, there's a much lighter energy for you than really for some years. And with a Libra ascendant myself, just by the midpoint of this particular chart, mine's 23 degrees, that's something that I will cheerfully embrace too. Now, Scorpio, of course, your 2 ruling planets of Mars and Pluto remain in that big conflict. That big conflict, therefore, provides a backdrop of energy for the next year. And with Uranus in your 7th house, it points towards me relationships. If you're in a relationship where you don't get the freedom you need, or you feel you get so much freedom you kind of think, well, there's no pushback, and that means you don't have much respect for the relationship, or conversely, you feel very controlled and throttled in this straitjacket of someone else's expectations, there's going to be the potential for change. And if you don't change it, you're going to be hotting up inside with frustration, because Mars square Pluto 3, 6th house, that points towards stress. If you're not manifesting your need to really think and do and act and go where you want. So I think there's a real opportunity for you this year, but I think it is managing that big dynamic. I will say that I think your finances could get better. And I think if that's something that you've really been wanting to happen, and you are creative Scorpio in particular, I think that's something very, very nice for you. But because the ascendant on this chart and the midpoint are tucked up in your 12th house, you're very good at weighing up other people and making sometimes some very acerbic comments to others, but some people could do that to you this year. You might be quite surprised, and that could make you feel a little bit unsettled. So generally speaking, a time of change around relationships, I think that's a fact. And it could be that if you want to work for yourself, it's something you thought about a lot over the years, now may be the time you go for it, with Saturn and Jupiter in the fourth house of your situation. But it might be that a partner who's more used to you having a more conventional role, they may not be quite as convinced as your hopes and plans to do this. Now, Sagittarius, having the Sun and Mercury and Pluto all in the sign of Capricorn at this time of the year, does make you think very much about resources. But let's think back over the last couple of years, because there aren't many Sagittarians that have fared well. If your natal horoscope sort of gave you some support through this situation, it may have been, I know one person wrote to me on YouTube and said they'd had a brilliant year through COVID, and I wrote back and said I was really thrilled to them. But I think, when we're talking about sun signs, we are talking about generalities. So the generality of the ascendant or the sun for Sagittarius over the last couple of years has been flipping difficult. And I think this year you're starting to think. It's already started. You're getting things going. You're getting back in the groove. Uranus is in a part of your horoscope which is asking you to innovate around how you work. That may mean being more flexible, working part-time, having a couple of different jobs, working in a part-time job but developing your own business. Anything to do with communication can see you doing well. Teaching, training, publishing, all of those you can sparkle at the best of times, particularly this year. But I feel that with Venus in your own sign, in that wonderful trine to Mars, don't underestimate your sex appeal. And even if you're in an existing relationship, somebody new could show quite an interest in you over the next year, which could prove to be hugely flattering. But I wouldn't get too carried away with it, not with Neptune in the mix, because it might all just be something that tickles your fancy emotionally. But if you're looking for anything more than that, maybe you could go for it if it's really what you need. But the midpoint is asking you to think very much about your future hopes. And I think that's asking you also to try to orientate your efforts, your output in life to a higher principle. In other words, try to do your best for people generally. So if there is something that needs to change, try to do it in some time served, quite honest ways, rather than getting caught up in any dramas in a kind of less obvious way. Now, in terms of Capricorn, the last couple of years, wow, it's been very powerful as we've had that eclipse series. And if any of those have touched your sun or any of your inner planets, it may have been a bit of a rocky time. And of course, with Mars still in a square to Pluto, along with that midpoint in the T-square, if there is somebody very close to you that just doesn't really get you and they're immediately in your space, you're going to push back against that. The other thing that's really going to be consuming you is your sense of self-worth. Now, that might seem a funny thing to say. The last couple of years have all been about you visualizing and then envisioning and then setting in motion the way in which you are individual, or working very, very hard to get some kind of return. Now, you're going to start to see the results of that almost immediately. If you've really put the application and the perspiration in like only you can, you may well be seeing some instant results. The problem is, this is not a great year for you to be a gambler. So by nature, you tend to run a little bit on the cautious side. I wouldn't go against that, but that doesn't mean to say you shouldn't speculate. There's a difference. Gambling is where you're really taking a punt on something, particularly based on your mood or mindset at that time. If you like a little flutter for entertainment purposes and you can manage that well, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about if you change a habit of a lifetime and put a big punt on a new business venture or a property or shares in something, I would be careful, because the influences that you have at the moment do give you an opportunity to think afresh, be very innovative. But with Mars in a direct right angle with Pluto, I think if you're too impulsive, it might not be good for you. So it's just like trying to find the balance. And of course, Saturn and Jupiter's very much about taking risks. It is the planet of fortune. That's why you could get some rewards at this time. But it is in a square with Uranus pretty early on this month, this year. And of course, Saturn and Uranus are in a square to the 21st of July from the start of the year, and then again over the time of your birthday at the end of the year. So generally speaking, I'd say stay open-minded, but don't be too gung-ho in your approach to resources. Now, Aquarius. Well, we've spoken a lot about this, Aquarius, haven't we, in the weekly, monthly, and the overview, your deep overview for 21. And that is that the psychological shadow side energies, the kind of hidden enemy stuff that's really fermented over the last couple of years has been really, really difficult. And I think, generally speaking, have Saturn and Jupiter in your sign is a good thing. I've, of course, as you know, got my sun at 0.28. So as I'm looking at this for New Year's Day, Saturn's just trundled past my sun. It is dependent on what what house sign it's in your natal horoscope. In this chart, it's talking about, for us all, the Aquarius energy being in the 4th house. If we think of it in terms of the solar chart, it means Aquarius energy is the 11th house, which is very much about friends, groups, maintaining individuality whilst finding ways to collaborate and cooperate. And that's obviously very Aquarius anyway. I would just think, if there is something you want to achieve, there is potentially, particularly if it's around a home, property or family matter, there is a bit of frustration that's likely to be ahead over the first 6 months of the year. And this could affect me as well. But there's also the potential to work within that. You know, have you ever done any running? So if you run and or swim or cycle and you're going flat out, there's no latitude there, you're just really pushing to do your best time or whatever. If you can just come inside your energy so it's not flat out and you're going well, you're focused on your targets and you're moving on, but don't try too hard. I think that's really the best advice I can give you, because if you do try too hard, it's going to cause a lot of irritability, a lot of frustration, and just accept that the whole world, as well as you, is in a degree of flux, and me too, and it will get there when it's meant to get there. But I think the glorious link between Venus and Mars, Venus is actually in my natal chart, it's conjunct my Saturn and Mars position, and they're in turn trining up with this solar return Mars. And of course, the midpoint's on my ascendant, as I've already said. So interesting for me personally. But what I would say for us Aquarians in general, our kind of world is coming. That kind of way of doing things. You can tell Aquarians from eyes. There is a genuine, a genuineness in many Aquarius people's eyes. Doesn't mean to say every single Aquarius is as honest as the day's long, but a lot of Aquarius people are. And I think the world is going to start speaking Aquarius language a lot more. And that's going to mean if you do something that's a bit different, like I do, you're not going to encounter so much resistance or the brickbats quite in the way of the past. But I just think the issue with this year is there can be an increase in your finances from mid-May to the end of July, which can be very gratifying, and again at the end of 21. But I think, generally speaking, set your intent, but don't expect it all to come straight away. And then, if you're running inside, you're swimming, cycling within your top speed, things will go forwards. Jupiter can really help you, so can Pallas. And you will get to where you want to be much of the time, but just don't force the pace too much. Now, Pisces, well, with Neptune, your ruler, and Jupiter, your co-ruler, very much in the astral news at the present time. What does this mean for you? Well, that clustering of energy between the Sun and through to Pallas all goes across for you your 10th and your 11th and 12th houses. There is going to be some reflection this year for you. You've also got an opportunity to do something that's very, very good, very positive with the Sun's angle to Uranus. And it's all about having the courage to strike out and do something for yourself that's fresh and different. You can be one of the most compassionate and giving and caring and sacrificing members of society. The problem is, are you losing your identity from being such a good egg? All very well being a good egg, not so good being a half exhausted battery hen. So think about walking on the wild side, cutting down on the obligations to others. Think about how you can reimagine your life in a new, more sparkling way. But I think along the way, you're going to find yourself becoming much more interested in spirituality, healing, philosophy, counselling. You may even sign up for a course for counselling for yourself. Or if you would like to become a healer or a counsellor, those kind of things can really call out to you. You may find some kind of spiritual practice or some kind of spiritual leader who really grabs your imagination this year. And that can be, on the whole, a very positive thing. When it comes to money, though, you could feel a bit conflicted, because if you earn good money at the moment but you're not really enjoying what you're doing, it may be difficult to let go of what you have done and start to do something different. And that's why Uranus's trine to the Sun gives you so much support. But I think it's letting go of the need that other people have for you. So if your neediness is being assuaged by other people needing you, look at your neediness rather than helping other people so much. That might seem quite a controversial thing to say. I have a Pisces draconic ascendant. My wife's midpoint between the Sun and the Moon is 5 degrees in Pisces. I've had a lot of friends who are Pisces people, can be incredibly giving and lovely people, but you need to make sure that you're giving to you. I don't know if you've heard this phrase, you will do if you're involved in any kind of light work, but heal thyself. So if you're spending all of your time working very long hours looking after poorly people, but you're not looking after you, or you're the person who always gets to work first, leaves last, that wonderfully devoted colleague, well, think about yourself and use that Sun trine Uranus to create a new reality which really freshens up your life and makes you feel tingling with excitement. And that's what life's about. It's been a real pleasure being with you. Remember to check out your year 2021 personal horoscope by seeing the link beneath this video. Gain searing insights into what the year holds for you as an individual. Based on your personal birth data, no two charts are the same. And whatever time you order that, I will give you full 12 months forecast from that time. But for now, stay safe, take care, good luck, and goodbye.